Uh, when we quote medium wages, the 2022 medium wages across the board is 2,424 ringgit. So that is the medium wage for Malaysia as a whole, which means 50% of the salarized Malaysians or Malaysian workers are getting less than 2,424 ringgit. Malaysia is unique among very few countries where medium wage in the manufacturing sector is lower than the general medium wage, because the manufacturing sectors around the world are generally and usually the most advanced sector in the society, and therefore usually pay a lot more compared to other sectors.
Especially services.
Especially services, yeah. So in the case of Malaysia, in 2022, the medium wage for manufacturing sector was 2,205 ringgit. What the new industrial master plan aspires for manufacturing sector, I want to be specific, that for manufacturing sector is that we hope to see that manufacturing sector will be reaching 4,510 ringgit by 2030. We are not talking about pushing wages artificially. We're talking about encouraging a lot more investment into manufacturing sector through the global shift, as well as a stronger domestic supply chain, stronger linkage, but also what they call creating a different type of labor market. So there should be multi-pronged, but at some point we want to see manufacturing sector leading other sectors, and at least double is medium wage. It is not easy, but I think given that we are now having this opportunity to create a tight labor market, it is possible. We are potentially seeing a tight labor market because, number one, we have broadly lost Indonesian as a source of labor. Malaysia used to depend on mainly Bangladeshi workers and Indonesian workers, but today most Indonesian workers will choose not to work in Malaysia, because if they were to be migrant workers, they would rather be a migrant worker in Jakarta. The minimum wage in Jakarta is higher than Malaysia's minimum wage. So the Indonesia ambassador has recently said that before COVID, there were 1.2 million legal Indonesian workers in Malaysia. Now it's about less than 500,000, just a bit less than 500,000 legal Indonesian workers in Malaysia, or documented Indonesian workers in Malaysia. Secondly, we are seeing so much investment coming in, particularly in the manufacturing sector. Soon, we will see a very tight labor market. And I think the role of the government is to make it tighter. The role of the government is really to introduce, and I hope at some point, as the Prime Minister announced in the budget, in 2024, we attempt to introduce multi-tier levy. If we can introduce a multi-tier levy that is punitive enough for big corporations, but giving a 5-year or even a 10-year schedule, so that companies can prepare. Gradually, it becomes more punitive by the year, so that hopefully by 5th or say the 7th year, it will be very punitive for big corporations that hire a huge number of foreign workers. They will have to pay very punitive levy for hiring foreign workers. But at the same time, the government will have to devise a very generous tax incentive for reinvestment into automation. That carrot and stick has to come together, and I hope we can really do this in 2024, so that we can regulate and create a tighter labor market. Once there is a tighter labor market, corporations will be forced to choose either to automate or to pay higher wages. Both are good for the nation. That means you don't necessarily have to pay higher wages, you just automate. You automate, hire less people, it's good for the nation as well, because then you take up. So I think this has to happen so that we can reach the sort of level of higher wages. And why higher wages is so important? See, the divide in this country is not a divide between Kuala Lumpur and Kelantan. The divide in this country is between Bangsa and Bangsa South, Akar Lembah Pantai. Or in the case of Monash, it's a divide between Sunway and Mentari. That social divide, which is walkable, but so visible, and that is a time bomb for the nation that we will have to deal with. And the only way that you can see massive, you can move the needle, is really to deal with wages and deal with the labor market. So I hope this is something that we can do. And of course, I applaud the work that you have done in thumbprints. Generally, I agree with your directions, and that is the directions that we will have to take. And many other companies will have to emulate your trajectory. Numerical goal that is to, through government effort, through the effort of our new industrial master plan, we hope to create at least 3,000 smart factory. So that at least is a numerical goals. But generally, I think number one, we will have to reconceive the idea of productivity. In this country, generally, we think that productivity means the workers has to work harder. The worker has to work harder, and let's say the workers he's working 8 hours. If let's say he's sweeping the floor, you want him to sweep 12 hours to prove that he's more hardworking. But the moment you give the worker, instead of a broom, you give him a vacuum cleaner or a machine, the dynamic has changed. Therefore, it means that we will need to, when we talk about productivity in this country, we need to think about this. Productivity is not just the labor. It's the investment into machine tools. It's the investment into digitalization that will change productivity. We will have to start thinking about how to reshape jobs. Okay, it's not just about reshaping. When we think about productivity, we will have to think about reshaping jobs to push up the wages as well. We are a country where we believe that having Nepalese security guard is the best thing, and we hire many of them who do not speak the local languages, and when there's a crime scene, they run away, and they cannot make police report. Right? That is an area where we can reshape jobs. Instead of hiring so many security guards from foreign countries, can we use a lot more CCTV? Can we use a lot more body camera? Can we use a lot more technology and hire Malaysians and you pay them better? Nurses, we know that we're losing nurses. We're losing nurses to Singapore and then to Saudi Arabia. Why do they go? Because the pay is so much higher. Can we think about pushing wages up, pushing private hospitals to raise wages at least? So reshaping jobs and reconfiguring jobs is also very important. But then it comes to businesses like thumbprint. During the first economic takeoff between 1988 and 1997, each year wages grew by about 9%. And the economy also grew by 9%. But of course, in our context, if our economy can grow consistently between 5.5 and 6%, and instead of 4%, that is a major success already. Over the next 10 years, if Malaysian economy can grow 5.5 to 6% annually, that's great. So you need wages will not grow without intervention, without government intervention. It's not like the first economic takeoff where wages grew alongside the economic growth rate. So here intervention is needed. But at the same time, we also believe that if this growth can sustain and actually happen, we should see Malaysian economy growing, and we should see more sales, more businesses in Malaysia and also in Southeast Asia because of the global shift to this region. And we are also hoping that Malaysia will be the Asia hub for many companies from other countries, as well as growing local champions. And in that process, it means more access to global market, and also it means more access, not just as a supplier, but also as a producer and producers of ideas. Finally, I think in terms of value adding, as you pointed out, from what they call general products to niche products, but also I think you are already embarking on that trajectory of blending manufacturing and services. It is not just manufacturing, but it's also a service that you're providing. I guess this will be a conversation that we will have to work with everyone, that we need to move to a higher end, and we also need to move away just from pure manufacturing to design to services.
Easy, some more questions from
Thank you, Kian Ming. First of all, to respond to Prof. Adiba, Mazzucato, I encourage all of you to read some of her work because what she's trying to say is that this whole idea that private sector create values and private sectors are the only creators of new ideas and new production processes and all this is not true, because the state plays a very important role, and she's trying to debunk the idea that the government is only a night watchman government, or play a night watchman role, and the government only comes in when there is market failure. So she's trying to reverse that idea to say that the government has a role to shape market and to shape a different market for better outcome, including better health outcome and also better climate outcome. And I think this is where we are trying to shift the whole conversation through the new industrial master plan. We want to see that whatever MITI and the government of Malaysia do from now has the end goals in mind. That means the end goals is we want to create a society that is more inclusive, a society that pay people better, and a society that focuses on tech up, focuses on higher, pushing the technology higher, and a society that actually creates more opportunity for value adding. So that, I think, is how her work shaped our thinking, that the state has a role to play and the government should not shy away from playing its role, of course, in the context of collaborating with all other societal actors. The questions on engineers, I acknowledge that the state of education, STEM, and also all these problems, but my usual response is this, this is a bit naughty. I say actually there's no talent problem in this country. There's only a pay problem. Because you have now engineer pays are so much better around now compared to 2 years ago. So for example, in Penang, generally a fresh grad engineer will be getting at least 3,008 pounds. But 2.5 years ago, the general market rate was 2,005. Why this happened? Because over the last few years, there are a lot more investment into manufacturing or high-end manufacturing in Penang, and that resulted in that massive shift. But the point is that we will have to accept that a young engineer will compare his wages here and his potential wages in Singapore. Generally, I ask all levels of Malaysian workers who work in Singapore, how much are you prepared to come back? The general rule of thumb is 2/3 of Singapore pay. Okay, you pay 2/3 of Singapore pay, no Malaysian wants to work in Singapore. But for industry to transition from 1/3 of Singapore pay to 2/3 of Singapore pay is very painful. Very painful. And I acknowledge that. So recently when I've been talking to industrial park operators, I say we need a mindset shift. One major mindset shift that we have that has happened in this country is that now we allow foreign workers hostel in industrial park. Before this, the urban planning idea in this country is that factories, where you work and where you stay, should separate, because we were influenced by this UK garden city concept in the last 100 years. Therefore, we create cities that's away from workplace and resulting in a lot of climate problems along the way. But I say, while we allowed for foreign workers' quarters in industrial park, we should move one step further. Why can't we build decent housing for young engineers? Why can't we build housing for Malaysian technicians? And if we can do so in industrial park, as long as these engineers are paid half of Singapore pay at the same level, with decent housing, they would not have any. The choice would be very easy. The choice is because housing cost is so high in Singapore. The choice will be easier. But regardless, the point is that we will have to deal with this fact that the Malaysian labour market and the Singapore labour market is essentially a single labour market. On the questions of wages for nurses, as far as government pay is concerned, over the last 10 years, Malaysia actually has experienced de facto austerity. Massive budget cut happened in 2014 and 2015 when there were oil crunch. I don't think this one has been, very few people talk about this. But because of the oil crunch in 2014 and 2015 that resulted in massive reduction of income, massive cuts were done during 2014 and 2015 and created a new baseline of government expenditure at that point of time. From then on, government expenditure was based on that new baseline. And you see that over the last 10 years, very little discussions about increasing wages because it's very difficult. So we are dealing with this problem, and we're also dealing with a very high subsidy payment over the last decade. So these are challenges that we will have to deal with. Very difficult challenge. How to balance subsidy cuts or subsidy rationalization or subsidy redirection, whatever you call it, from paying workers better, paying government nurses better. That is a major challenge. Professor Nafli's questions on competitive advantage. I hope to build a new consensus in this country. I hope to build a new consensus in this country on how to position Malaysia. There are many people in this country who believe that Malaysia is competing with Vietnam and Indonesia. But I hope we recognize and we acknowledge our indispensable role in Southeast Asia, where we are not Indonesia, we are not Vietnam, and we're not competing with them. I don't want to say that we are competing with Singapore, because I think there are a lot more that we complement Singapore than we compete with Singapore. But we will have to at some point see ourselves that Malaysia is able to do almost everything that Singapore can do with a bit of inefficiency. Not too much. So this year I hosted many foreign dignitaries. It is very interesting that quite a few state visits by different what they call presidents or prime ministers. Their visits were actually to Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam. These three countries.
Yeah, like the Dutch Prime Minister.
Yeah, a few of them. I don't want to name the names, but quite a few foreign dignitaries actually visit these three countries at once. And behind the thinking is something called semiconductor. Now, in the semiconductor industry, it is very clear. Singapore is at the highest end. Malaysia is occupying the indispensable middle. Vietnam is doing the labor-intensive activities. Of course, Vietnam also attempt to do more. But these three countries, while they compete, they also complement in a vertical integration. And I think we should position ourselves in that middle to think that we can do almost what Singapore can do with 1/8 or 1/10 of Singapore land cost, with a bit of inefficiency, acknowledge that, but seeing ourselves almost at par with Singapore with a bit of discount, or including a 1/3 of pay discount. And this is exactly how European or American investors are seeing us. Because for about 20 years, Malaysia was forgotten. Because the factory was China. Factory was China, and there was no need for Malaysia to exist in the global supply chain. However, when this global shift happened, when they invest in Singapore, they need to find the space for bigger factories. When they look at Southeast Asia, when they look at the supply chain, Malaysia has very similar conditions. We have the same logistical advantage of the Malacca Straits, and combines the combination of Port Klang, PTP, and Tuas is where investors can access. If you don't like PTP, you can go to Tuas. You pay a bit more, you go to Tuas, but you have access to the same logistical network that goes everywhere, including African. We have African route that actually you can do that. Then we have the same English common law framework. We have the same mid-level workforce, mid and high-level workforce that Singapore has, because 1 million Malaysians are working there. Anytime you pay them enough, they come. Okay, so we should position ourselves in that sort of level, and if we can build that national consensus where to position ourselves, then a lot of other questions and debates will be a lot more easier. The final question is on machinery and financial. Yeah, I agree that as I say, our GLCs and GLICs have not focused on manufacturing for the longest of time. Our banks are slowly only now learning about how to finance manufacturing. Okay, because our banks for the longest of time were only interested in financing people to buy houses, buy car, and nothing else, or personal loan. But slowly, I think when you talk to people, particularly this year, when I meet many of them, they do realize that there's this shift, and the banks wants to understand more about manufacturing. They want to do more with manufacturing.
And also the ESG part.
And also ESG. Yeah, also ESG. The banks are very interested, and interestingly, the banks are at the forefront of ESG compared to anyone else. And I think that the shift, I'm particularly interested to see how we can nudge GLC to shift away from being land and resource based to being tech based. And also the big corporations, the big developers, how do they move away from developing land to become catalysts for industry? That conversation is new, but it is emerging, and it's important that we build that consensus to drive that shift.